Lance said, talk about how do you reach Gen Z, and then talk about how to work on a staff with multi-generational staff. So 3 things about reaching Gen Z. The first one is they are not the same. He's like, tell me something, right, to quote Mosey Ellis in the blues singer, tell me something I don't know. And a matter of fact, I was just working with financial executives of the universities of Oklahoma a couple weeks ago, and one of them at breakfast goes, I watch the videos online, I've adjusted all the generations, I just don't get Z. I don't get them. And part of it is, what they said, here we're in colleges, they expect us to not only listen to them, but to go change stuff based on their thoughts. And that is very different than the wait your turn that most of us grew up with. So I said to my mother and my uncle, when we were planning the family reunion, I said, we need to change it because none of the teenage grandkids want to go to a full weekend once a year in Turkey Run State Park in Indiana. Now, it is a great state park. It really is fantastic, right? When you live in a very flat land, Starved Rock's all we got around here, right? Starved Rock's what we got, and then you got flatness, and then you got Turkey Run. And so thank God for limestone and, running water. And so it's a beautiful thing. But after 15 years of it, my kids were changing shifts with other people in their jobs to miss the reunion. And then when my brother's family found out that Max was able to work and miss it, suddenly they were like, I am out of here next year. Because they wanted to go to a water park at Wisconsin Dells. And here's what the older generation said. When we're gone, you can do anything you want. When we're gone, you can do anything you want. To which I said something a little sassy. I said, can I get an ETA? And my mother smiled. She did smile. And then she goes, that's not funny. I said, you're right, it isn't. But right now is when we need to change it. When you're finally gone, and I hope that's not for 15 years. When you're finally gone, they'll have little kids. And they'll want to put them in the pool and water wings and be close enough to the lodge that they can put them to bed for a nap, and Turkey Run will be perfect. It's not been perfect for us for about 6 years, and they hate it. That illustrates 2 things. Younger generations have changed the rules of wait your turn quite a bit. You see it especially on staff. But they really kind of do expect to be listened to and things to be adjusted when they say things. And secondly, it is really hard now that there are 6 generations. It's really hard. You put a marble in one end of the pipe and another one falls out the other end of the pipe. You do something for them and then they're not happy. Would you turn to the person next to you and would you speak to them a word of encouragement? You ready? If I was talking to charismatics, I'd go give them a word of knowledge, but that's not us, right? That's not us. So just give them a word of encouragement. Both are written in Scripture. I'm just pulling the one, right, that the one that's my tribe. So turn to the person next to you, look them in the eye, repeat after me. No matter what you do, at least one generation will think you're the wrong pastor. Probably 2.5. Probably 2.5 out of the 6. All right, now that's not a word of encouragement. That's a word of knowledge. That's a word from the Lord. Now, why do we have 6 generations? Not since Methuselah have we had that many. Why do we have 6 generations? Because the saints won't go marching in, right? People just keep living and living and living. We live 30 years longer than we did. 100 years is God's greatest blessing. It is God's greatest blessing. But unless we get strategic about it, it will also be the reason that millions of people go to hell. Because people used to die off in enough time to change more quickly, plus society changed more slowly. Generations didn't happen that fast. There's not that big of a difference between the first half of traditionalists and the second half of traditionalists, often called the silent generation. There's not that big of a difference. The big startling difference that led to All in the Family being a hit TV show was the huge difference between traditionalists and the baby boomers that came along. And one of the biggest differences is the deference pyramid of who has to defer to who, to use a sociological buzzword, has changed dramatically. And senior ministers feel it more than anybody else. They're like, all right, now how much adjustment do I have to do before you're happy? Right? How much adjustment do I have to do? You don't have to do any adjustment, because right now you have cheesecake or tiramisu to choose from. Those are both happy choices, are they not? Happy choices. Okay? Does it make sense? The first key thing in reaching Gen Z is you may not be able to. You may not be able to. Now, the great thing about that red book is it has a whole section about what your options are. Now, I'm talking about millennials there, but that all still applies. What are your options? Because you are commanded to serve and minister to Gen Z. But you may not be able to target or reach Gen Z without having the whole other end of the pipe fall out. Does this make sense? The least successful model dealing with generations in churches is the multi-generational model. It's the least successful. Now, I once said that at the North American Christian Convention. A person pulled me aside and said, that was my whole master's thesis. That's been my whole aim as a minister. He goes, I pray that we will be larger than Willow Creek just to prove that this is right. I said, I'd pray differently if I were you. I just kind of let it go, Frozen. It's been 25 years. You've been mad that you're not hitting your goals. There are reasons why multi-generational is hard. I worked with a Lutheran church in Houston. They truly wanted to adjust the worship service for every generation. They had 17 dials they did where they narrowed into 17 different worship, and they touched each of those worship points every month. Do you know how much work that takes versus just trying to reach somebody in your neighborhood? Now, I'm not saying if that's what God calls you to, do what God calls you to. I'm just saying that's a whole lot of work internally rather than externally. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So the chapter explains a bit about what those options are. So the church out in the country in western Indiana that my aunt and uncle go to, it is not going to reach a lot of Gen Zers. They'll probably have to shut that puppy down sooner or later one day. Does that make any sense? Okay, good. Sell it off, get the money from the assets, and go start another church that reaches Gen Z. Everybody's responsible for serving the younger generation. That's in the playbook, isn't it? But not everybody can reach it. That's the most important thing. The most important thing you can figure out is, who is God calling us to reach? I was working with a church. I was just in Albuquerque again last week, and I was down there 5 years ago with the church, and they had this dream of a children's center. Actually, they were Methodists, and it really made them mad that the Christian church up there in the mountains had a lot of kids, and they didn't. And somebody wanted to give money for a gym, but they didn't need a gym. And they had a big demographic survey. And nobody who with young children could afford to live in the foothills. The Christian church in the foothills had pretty much sucked up all the young children in that whole area. It was just a bunch of retired or wealthy baby boomers because the housing market had changed, and it had changed who could live there. Does this make sense? But they still wanted to reach children because, as Lau Schaller pointed out, we're here in Naperville, so we have to mention Lau Schaller by name, right? Lau Schaller pointed out they had a 30-year-old plan they were trying to implement in a world that changed. They just wanted to do phase 3 before they passed. And so the first question is, who's God calling us to reach? The second one is, boy, we got to do apologetics differently. Apologetics has got to be done differently, because they ask very different questions. And one of the reasons you may not be able to reach Generation Z is the way you have to do apologetics may get you fired. What I mean by that is, There is a lot more dialogue and a lot less, this is the right answer to that question. The minute you have, here's the right answer to this question. 7 days, that's a right answer to this question. Okay? Then suddenly you're done with Gen Z. Even growing up in the church, Gen Zers. Now, they may end up at the same place as that, but it is a conversation. But you may get in trouble, right? You may get in trouble. You may get in trouble for that. Now, if you want to do apologetics, what do you have to do? Well, do you realize that there are, and I don't expect you to, but do you realize that there are atheists whose entire YouTube presence is making fun of evangelical and fundamentalistic ministers because there's so many sermons online. They watch their sermons, they then take pieces of it, and then they debunk it. Now, about 2/3 of the clips they find and debunk are worthy of debunking. They're simply not well done. Okay? Some of the arguments that we make in the house of the Lord are not good. There's a section in the book that talks about doing apologetics differently. So that's all I'm saying. So here's 3 ideas to help with that. The first one is, and millennials cared more about apologetics. Here's the irony. Gen X did not care about apologetics. As a generation, they wanted action. They wanted action. Millennials cared much more about apologetic conversations, just like baby boomers did. Gen Z cares even more. So the subtitle of the book is wrong. So my book has wrong title. So subtitle is Christianity Isn't Dying, Millennials Aren't the Problem, and the Future is Bright. I wanted to say the future could be bright, and Tyndale said, no, you got to take a stand, buddy. You can't just have a wishy-washy title. I'm like, well, that's not accurate. We don't know yet. And we do know now. And with Gen Z, it is not nearly as bright as it was with millennials. Millennials were still more interested in church. Gen Z is not nearly as interested in church. And as Matt and I were just talking about, when Gen Z has kids, they don't go back to church. They don't see church as necessarily a place that is going to help them parent yet. It's still young. They're only 26 and younger. It's still young, but it's not good indications. Much higher level of nuns, much higher level of atheists or agnostics in Gen Z than we've seen before. Can you see why I'm not an inspirational, motivational speaker? That's why we give you dessert in the middle of this, so you got something to smile about. Yeah. You need to find some Gen Z people. If you want to, even if you're not trying to reach them, please don't offend them. Does that make sense? Please don't offend them. So when you're writing sermons, for example, you need to have a Gen Zer who will at least look it over or at least tell you their thoughts after you're done. So they can go, now that's a dog whistle for people who see this or this or this, and you probably didn't even realize that phrase has a certain meaning to people in my generation. I know that because I listen to my own kids go, I don't think the minister meant to say that, but here's what everybody my age heard. Because on YouTube, this is what this would mean. Do you know YouTube has been Gen Z's search engine? The most popular search engine for Gen Z has always been YouTube. Do you know the average Gen Z male in 5th grade watches an hour and 20 minutes a day of other people playing video games on YouTube? They don't play the games themselves. They watch other people play video games on YouTube. YouTube has taken over the world, right? And so one of the places that we go is there. So find somebody who can review that and just help you not say things that you don't mean to communicate. And then secondly, find somebody who can help you not say things too simplistically. If you want to connect with Gen Z, older generations want it broken down. Just spell it out. What are you trying to say? Younger generations are used to a lot more disclaimers. So just last week at Parkview, they're doing an apologetic series, and so they did the problem of pain. And, there was for Gen Z, there needed to be about 7 more disclaimers. I love the way Dallas Willard would say it. He's a philosophy professor. He would say it this way: I don't have time to explain all the things I don't mean by what I just said. That's what a disclaimer is. Isn't that a great way to say it? Now, if we had another 20 minutes, I could tell you all the things I don't mean. Some of you are going to come and see me after the service, and we'll chat about what I didn't mean when I said that. Let me give you 2 of about 7 things I don't mean. And then people go, oh, okay, all right. So you know more about this than you're saying here. Well, of course. Now, some of you are like, I really feel like I needed to get a seminary degree in apologetics to be able to communicate to younger millennials and Gen Z. That would help. Honestly, it would help. And thank goodness not all of us have to have the same part of the body, right? Because that many people on that lobe of the brain, it would be a weird looking church, would it not? Yeah. And so find some people who pay attention to all that stuff, who watch those videos, who know what's there, what the language is, what the questions are, what's being asked. Find them and ask them to help you. I've got a son like that. So if you're doing an apologetic series and you want to talk to somebody about it who knows all that geeky stuff, my son Josh, you should call him. I'm not making this up. I told him I would tell you. You should call him and go, your dad said that I should call you and you might talk to me. Now, you'll have to calm him down. He'll go, oh, now this okay. Just give me 2 levels deep, not 7 levels deep. I don't care what Derrida thought on Thursday. I just want to get down to here. That's all I want to get to. So I don't make us look foolish and end up on a YouTube video of pastors that read a book and then talked about it. Does that make any sense? That is probably the hardest thing with Gen Z, are the level of questions they're asking and the more intense skeptics there are online. Now, many of the skeptics are tupid. Many of them have stupid arguments that a sophomore in Bible college in a well-done class could undo. One of them just passed this week, who did a bunch of dumb arguments. But not all their arguments are dumb. Not all their arguments are dumb. When a guy I went to seminary with became an atheist, a fairly famous one, somebody goes, well, I can't believe it. I said, well, you make some good arguments that are worth responding to. Really? You think he makes good arguments? Well, yeah, what would you say about this one and this one? Oh, those are pretty good. Yeah, if God did not choose to make it absolutely clear, right? There's not been a Super Bowl show that he interrupted and said, hey, I just want you to know, here are the answers to these things. I'm right here. He still expects us to walk by faith in some areas. And so Gen Z is ready to have that conversation. You don't have to do it. You got a lot of other things. You don't have to watch all that stuff online. You need to find some resources that can help you go, what would be Gen Z's questions about this? And once again, if you address some of their questions, you may run afoul. You may run afoul. Here's another one you'll run afoul on. You could. And that is, sex is the single biggest issue between Gen Z and the church right now. All things sexuality and sexual. People are like, well, how do we talk about issues around, gender fluidity and transgender and LGBTQ+? How do we talk about that in a way that people hear the good news of the gospel rather than just, no. Well, the bigger issue than that is Jesus is like, you really shouldn't have a lot of sex with a lot of people. You should just go and marry somebody. I'm like, you want to make everybody mad? Just plop out that one that is not at all unclear, right? They're in any debate over what it says about that. And so all things sexual. And like I point out in the book, matter of fact, I did a session for elders at Lincoln of Christian college about 5 years ago. And at the end of the day, because people would ask questions and I talk about what are things you got to do on a number of topics. And we had a whole day at the end of the day, David Upchurch goes, well, you want to come back next year? You want to have Haydn next year and have him talk about sex again? And because it ends up when you're talking about millennials and Gen Z, sex becomes a pretty big topic. Now, the thing is, you want to look around YouTube? There was a word that, well, I remember when I was a youth minister at First Christian Church of Joliet, there was a big debate because the youth minister before me liked to listen to a particular group that had an album that spelled out what F-U-C-K means. That was a big debate. Now, you can't get through most podcasts without that word being dropped, right? We're in a very different world. So what it means is, because slang and cussing shows us what's trivial and what's regarded as special or sacred. And, fornicating without carnal knowledge was a very sacred thing to violate. And now it don't matter. And Charlie Peacock, he had an old song. I'm an old man, so I remember Charlie Peacock because he's an old man. He had an old line in a song where he said, baby, they're talking trash about the love we make. So there's a whole section in that book you're getting about one way to present conversations around sexuality. But the point is, it gets talked about all the time except in the church. It gets talked about all the time except in the church. And if you'll have some conversation with Gen Zers, they will tell you, I can't bring up at church the stuff I get asked about all the time when I'm out with friends. If I brought up the kind of conversations I have when I'm out with friends, people in the church would think I have lost my salvation. It is not, and Kinnaman, Barna, discovered about 40% of evangelical younger people felt that way. I can't talk about what my friends talk to me about. How could you believe this if you believe in? But it's just, I couldn't have those conversations. I keep many of my thoughts to myself. And so, once again, how's that for depressing? How's that for depressing? And the point is, some people are called to deal with that and some are not. I remember working with a non-instrumental Church of Christ in Atlanta. And they're like, what do we do to reach younger generations? I pulled aside one of the associates and said, well, when I saw the meet and greet, your senior minister is really engaging with everyone over 45. And he is just awkward with anyone under 45. So you can't. You can have other people who can do outreach in the community, but you cannot connect with them because that's not in his wheelhouse. It doesn't make him bad. It makes him not able to do that. Does that make sense? You can't do everything. There are a bunch of different churches. I hope some of you do a really great job with baby boomers. And I hope those baby boomers go to estate planning things and leave Ignite a bunch of money and leave a bunch of other money. And then you give that money away for other people who can reach generations you can't reach. Does this make sense? It is called spoiling the Egyptians. We take the boomers for all they're worth in the name of Jesus. There's a reason why the population and the income has gone like this over the last 50 years, like a J-curve. God's got big plans for what he wants to do with the money he's given. And the boomers got it. And God wants it. Am I understating that? So, if you got boomers in your community like that church in the mountains of Albuquerque, go reach a bunch of boomers and do a really good job. And if you like conversations with younger people, we'll have a bunch of great conversations. You just got to find enough boomers who will pay for it. Am I being blunt? That's what you need, enough boomers who will pay for it. Choosing the ones that want their kids. It's the ones that want their kids in the kingdom of God really bad. They'll hang with you. And they'll go, well, what do we got to do next to make the adjustments or the changes? And I love the saints that have rigor mortis, right? They like their generation. It's the country they're comfortable in. That's what they like. That's what they know. I love those people. I'm going to see them in heaven. If they need to be beat up, Jesus will do it. When they get up to heaven, he'll go, you know, you really shouldn't have been so tight, huh? Should have been looser about that. But boy, worship is really deep. I mentioned that in the book, that worship goes deep. When they do brain stuff and they have to work on somebody's brain, they can't remember their family. They can't remember. You remember the person who couldn't remember things for like 7 seconds, but he could still play piano from memory? Music is deeper than almost anything else in our brain. And so we're like, I don't know why people get so uptight about the music at church. Because it goes deeper than our brain. What speaks to you and your heart. Sometimes we're not that patient. I remember what Fred Craddock used to say about growing up in rural Georgia. He said, I discovered that some of the people were more prejudiced against the prejudice than the prejudice were prejudiced. He said it took a while for a Southern boy to learn to see the world differently. You know, sometimes we're just not patient with people who like music a certain way. And if you're younger and you're in a church that's really pretty traditional in the way they do things, it's good practice. Because I'm going to move over now to talking about what do we do with staff, multi-generational staff. I think the first thing is we complain about the generation who's leading, and then when we move into the stage of life where we're leading churches, we create the culture and the relationships that we wanted when we started. So what we complained about, we create. And we do it only 20 years too late. And then there's 2 other generations to complain about us, and it's the great circle of life, right? Would you turn to the person next to you, look them in the eye, and repeat after me? You have made a wonderful staff culture for you. And the irony of it is, isn't that the great circle of life? And so now we got Gen Z coming here, people going, I don't know what to do with them. That's okay. As Matt and I were talking about, that's what the senior ministers said before. Did it? I don't know what to do with those Xers that are coming in with all of that sass and ideas, right? And then now Gen Z comes in, and well, what about emotional health? And what are we going to do as a staff? And who's going to, no, it's not mentor anymore. It's pour into. I have no idea what that means. Huh? I'm too old for that phrase. Every one of my kids has said, I need someone to pour into me. No, that's for lemonade. What are you talking about? Who talks like that? I'm going to reach out. No, in my world, that's called illegal. You go see HR if you reach out too much. You're going to send an email, Skippy. That keeps you out of trouble. I'm going to reach out and pour into somebody. Now, us Xers, we are so efficiency-oriented. I mean, we really are. Xers were like, and the research on meetings are like, chop, chop, chop. Because I got kids to pick up at daycare. Let's get in, let's get out. Matter of fact, Gen X is the most oriented toward a meeting by 1 percentage point, Roper discovered, compared to every other generation, which was against what people said about Gen X. But it was only if it was necessary. In Gen X's mind, half of all meetings could be done away with, and you could just send something in writing and get it done. Because they were the FAQ, first generation with FAQs. First generation to date typing. Hello? Hello? What are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. A lot of young women dated guys that their dad would have screened when it was all phone done, right? Because their dad had the phone by the main Captain Kirk Star Trek chair. And you pick up the phone and go, more than once I had to hang back up because I did not have the courage to get it out when the old man answered, right? More than once. Yep. Now I lost some liquid, but I could not get the words out, is what I'm saying. Is what I'm saying there. And, because a lot of bad stuff got screened by the old man going, there ain't no way, baby, you're dating him. And after Gen X, there were some rough times for some people because you could do that all in chat rooms. So, 4 or 5 things. First one is Gen Z is much more oriented in mental health. If sexuality is what came out of the closet for millennials, mental health is what's come out of the closet for Gen Z. I mean, think about it. My daughter, I'm just seeing if he's standing up. Okay, I'm just seeing how much time I got and why he's standing up. And that's why he's standing up. The dessert's long gone. All right, so my daughter's playing music in the car. How many of you have kids and once they get a playlist, you have never chosen music in your car while driving with your children or grandkids for the rest of your life? Right? So she's playing this music, and I said to her, this sounds like a musical about mental health. She goes, I know it is. It was Dear Evan Hansen. It's an entire musical about mental health, social anxiety, going to a counselor, bullying, online bullying. I'm like, this is like an off-Broadway, lasts for 3 weeks, despair in a drama. You don't make a musical about it. But that's everything that every high schooler is dealing with. I'm like, she goes, yeah, it's me and my roommate's favorite musical. I said, baby, should I know something? She goes, not for me. No, that's not my issues, but a lot of people struggle with this, Dad. It outsold more soundtracks than anything since 1969 in Man of La Mancha, the first week it was launched. It's crazy. I had to go get a subscription to Broadway in Chicago so my daughter could make sure to see it. Right? That was the only way to guarantee to get tickets, is to have the 5-show subscription. There were some duds in there just to prove my love to that girl. Okay. Yeah. So mental health and talking about mental health. Matt and I were talking about parenting and how that influences stuff. Gentle parenting. My point is, and now that I'm old, I've noticed that every 15 years, what comes out in management books are the same thing that were in parenting books 15 years before. And we had child-centered parenting with the Searses, and now we've got gentle parenting, where you never raise your voice, get upset, and the rod is something you spare all the time, right? And so, gentle parenting. Well, how are you feeling about that? Put that down. Put that down and share your feelings. There's a whole lot of grandparents trying to figure out how to do gentle parenting with their grandkids so they're allowed access, right? That it really is funny, because I've had about enough gentle parenting. Anyway, don't get me. She don't need gentle parenting. Right? So people come in, and Xers are like efficiency oriented. Because when they came into a church staff, they go, hey, you got any ideas of what we ought to do? If I had time and ideas, I wouldn't have hired you now, would I? That's what Xers both in churches and in businesses heard when they came into the workplace. And so when Gen Z comes in and goes, hey, you got a minute? Just want to tell you how I'm doing. And they're like, you want to share your feelings with me about your day? I got to get home to stuff. Just yesterday, I talked to a woman who's like, I really want to reach more autistic families. Reach not in a religious sense, but I want to help level 2 and 3 autistic families with home, but I can't find enough people to provide the care. I said, when I told her all the things she'd have to do if she really was going to reach more Gen Z, she was like, I'll just cut it back to 10. She goes, I don't have time for that. She was talking like a true Xers. Xers really do believe they don't have time for that. And they really do believe that Gen Zs are just a little bit fragile, little snowflakes. Just a little bit fragile. Now, part of it is Xers had more part-time jobs after school than any other generation we've had. And so for Xers, it was like, well, I got to do this and I got to do this. And some were latchkey kids and put food in and help siblings with homework. And then you got a generation that had pediatricians, batting coaches, math coaches, 14 adults that were around them supporting them. And they come into church and they're like, I'm not quite sure how to do that. You want to do that together? I'm like, no, I don't want to do it together. I wouldn't have hired you if I wanted to do it together. And I was working with a mission agency. They're like, we got all these extra missionaries. They're like, I don't need a sabbatical every 3 years. That's for sissies. Stay with the kingdom. And then we got these younger generations that are like, I need to FaceTime home. Again tonight? Well, can I do that like 7 times a week? They're like, what is wrong with you little sissy people? Just a whole different way of experiencing the world and what it means to be supported. Does that make any sense? One more with Gen Z and we'll wrap it up. When you're on a staff, so meetings and what we do in meetings and how supportive we are, and then political discussions. Over time, evangelicals have become much more conservative politically. Gen Z is much more liberal politically. Even highly religious Gen Z are much more political. For example, much greater emphasis on socialism. So for many people, socialism and Christianity are like, no, those don't go together. They don't live in Europe, but they're, Christians here in the United States, that's really a hard thing. And so that'll drive some people crazy. And then kind of the conversations that people want to have. And it goes hand in hand with what kinds of things can I say that would offend people. And just realize that a lot of times you'll spend nodding and going, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? And where'd you end up there? Why'd you end up there? And it's not the way I think. But thank goodness I didn't keep us in and out of the kingdom of God. And then we'll get on with our time. Does that make any sense? Much less conformity. And then lastly, I know I said lastly before, but if I lie regularly, I can just keep talking. I just thought we really ought to add this one. Gen Z does best when they can think out loud. So actually, a tool I developed is now being used by the Navy on board their manual for the officers at sea. And it's around listening by leaning into the negative. Because they're trying to figure out what do you do with all these different political opinions on board for 6 months. How do you make that happen without terrorists infiltrating a couple of people at sea who then they take over their mind because they feel like nobody cares or understands them, and then they push the button and blow up the whole thing. That makes sense? So it's kind of a national security risk that they're dealing with. And anyway, we just kind of listen. Ed Stetzer's, Barnes, bunch of secular research all come to the same conclusion. What emerging adults, people 18 to 28, need the most is somebody other than their parents they can think out loud with. Oh, all right, one more. If you're big enough, I'd make your youth ministry go till 22. Just because the high school stops at 18 doesn't mean half of all young people drop out for at least a year. And the thing that cancels that most is just 2 contacts a month, whether it's a text or a phone call or a letter. It cuts that by 30%. So if you could cut dropout by 30%, you just say, stay their sponsor all the way through. Who's going to stay the sponsor of the people off at college? Yeah, they're impossible to plan for when they get home. They don't have any money, right? Because their parents aren't giving them money. They're all working part-time jobs. So it's a really hard group to program for, of course. They just need somebody to keep in touch with them while they go away to university. All right, I'm way over time now. So you ready for the exciting conclusion? I'm just going to sit down.